Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. The Passover was the meal of salvation for the people of God. Jews celebrate the Passover every year to remember how God saved them from slavery in Egypt, how the blood of a lamb on their doorposts marked them as God's people. And they used this meal to remember that God had expressly acted there and then on their behalf. If you wonder if God really does things, any Jew would point to this event and say, God came and saved us right there. The meal was to celebrate and to remember. This week we are walking along with Jesus through the days of Holy Week and exploring the things that happened each day as he made his way to the cross. Today is Thursday, and it was the day on which the Passover began, and it was a full day indeed. The first thing that happened was that Jesus sent Peter and John to oversee the preparations for their celebration. In fact, many biblical scholars believe that John served as the host of the meal and would have been next to Jesus at the table. In Jewish tradition, the day begins at sundown, not at sunrise like we think of it, so that Thursday night at 6 p.m. the Passover would have begun. Many things happened at that meal. Jesus washed his disciples' feet. It was traditional in a world with dusty roads and people wearing sandals that on entering a home, a lowly servant would wash the feet of the guests. No one expected Jesus to take on that role. And yet Jesus used this as an opportunity to talk about humility, that we are all valuable and equal in God's eyes, and that we are called to be servants for one another. Then they celebrated the Passover meal, and as they remembered over bread and wine how God had saved their people, Jesus gave them a new meal of bread and wine to express the new way that God was saving the people now. This is my body, he said. This is my blood. And it was right after the meal that Judas left in order to betray Jesus to the priests and religious leaders. Then Jesus and the remaining disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives, and Jesus prayed and dedicated himself to God's will. And while he was praying, Judas came with the guard and betrayed Jesus into their hands. You might think that that's all that happened, but no. Jesus was taken to the high priest's house. The high priest was Caiaphas, but things were really run by his father-in-law, a man named Annas. Jesus was taken there, interrogated by Annas and Caiaphas, and they eventually put him on trial before the Jewish council, even though there were specific rules that you couldn't have a meeting of the council at night. In the meantime, Peter follows along and enters the courtyard. And when people recognize him, he denies knowing Jesus 3 different times. When it's all over, he goes out and weeps bitterly. Perhaps one more interesting tidbit. At Jesus' trial that night, as it wrapped up, Caiaphas, the high priest, tore his robe and said that they didn't need witnesses any longer because Jesus had uttered blasphemy. This small detail has more meaning than we may have realized. When a man was condemned to death, the judge tore his robe and never repaired them. That was a sign of the individual's break with the covenant and the finality of the sentence. Caiaphas has declared that Jesus is excommunicated away from God. Little did he know that God was standing there before him. We call this day Maundy Thursday because at the meal Jesus commanded his followers to love one another. In Latin, the word command is mandatum, which is where the word Maundy comes from. Like them, we are called to live lives of love. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.